Welcome to the Glitch Archive. Tonight's stories come from the strange places where memory, time, and reality seem to slip out of place. Before we open the archive, leave a comment and tell us where you're listening from. And if you enjoy calm, unsettling stories like these, a like and subscribe helps more than you know. Now get comfortable and let the archive begin. The doorbell at my old address. I moved out of my first apartment almost 8 years ago, but for a long time I still had dreams about the building. It was not a special place. 4 floors, yellowish brick, a narrow stairwell that smelled like old paint and somebody else's cooking, and a front door that always needed to be pulled upward before the lock would catch. The apartment itself was small enough that I could clean the whole thing in an hour. 1 bedroom, 1 living room, a kitchen with tiles that never felt clean, and a balcony barely wide enough for a chair. I lived there during a strange part of my life, the kind of period where nothing terrible is happening, but you can feel yourself becoming someone you will eventually leave behind. When I moved out, I thought I was done with it. I turned in the keys, changed my address, and never went back. Then my current doorbell rang one evening while I was making dinner. I checked the intercom screen, expecting a delivery driver or a neighbor. Instead, the little black and white display showed the entrance hall of my old apartment building. Not a place that looked like it. The actual lobby. The same cracked tile near the mailboxes. The same radiator under the notice board. Even the old peeling sticker on the glass door was visible. At first I thought it was some kind of video glitch. Maybe the screen had frozen from a previous feed, although that made no sense because I had never lived in this current building at the same time as that old one. I pressed the talk button and said hello. The speaker crackled. A voice answered from the other side, quiet and distorted by the intercom. "You left the light on." I stood there with the spatula still in my hand. "What?" "The kitchen light," the voice said. "You left it on when you went." That was impossible for a few reasons, but the one my mind grabbed first was the simple one. I had moved out 8 years ago. If a light had been left on, someone would have noticed. The landlord, the next tenant, anyone. The screen flickered. For a moment, instead of the lobby, I saw my old kitchen from the doorway. Same white cabinets. Same little window over the sink. A rectangle of yellow light shining on the floor. Then the display went black. The doorbell did not ring again that night, but the smell of my dinner had changed while I stood there. The onions in the pan were burned black. I did not sleep much that night. I told myself it had been a cross signal or a prank or a fault in the intercom. Modern buildings have cameras everywhere, systems are connected badly, wires get mixed up, people mess with things. By morning, I had almost convinced myself. Then I found the envelope. It was on the mat inside my front door, even though I had bolted the door before going to bed. There was no stamp, no address, just my name written in block letters. Inside was a single key. I knew it immediately. It was the spare key to my old apartment, the one with a small red plastic ring around the top. I had lost it shortly before moving out and paid the landlord a fee for replacing it. At the time, I thought it had slipped behind a drawer or fallen through a hole in a coat pocket. Holding it again made me feel strangely ashamed, as if the apartment had been waiting all those years for me to admit I had taken something. I should have thrown it away. Instead, after work, I took the train across the city to the old neighborhood. The building looked smaller than I remembered. Most places do. There was a new bakery on the corner and different names on the doorbells. I stood outside the entrance for several minutes, trying to decide what I was doing. My old apartment was on the 2nd floor. The name beside the buzzer was someone I did not know. I rang. No answer. I rang again. This time, the intercom clicked, and my own voice came through the speaker. Not my voice now. My voice from years earlier, younger and thinner, recorded from some ordinary moment I could not place. "I'm not home," it said. Then the front door buzzed open. I looked around the street. A cyclist passed. Someone carried a paper bag out of the bakery. Nobody seemed to notice me standing there, holding a key that should not exist. I went inside. The stairwell smelled exactly the same. At the second floor landing, I found the door to my old apartment open by a few centimeters. I knocked once. Nobody answered. I pushed the door gently and saw the hallway beyond. The place was empty. Not empty as in vacant, but empty as I had left it years ago, after the movers had taken everything, and I had cleaned badly because I was too tired to care. The walls had the pale rectangles where my pictures had hung. The floor had the same mark where my old desk chair had scraped the wood. At the end of the hall, the kitchen light was on. I walked toward it because there did not seem to be any other choice. On the kitchen counter was a mug I had owned back then, white with a blue crack down the side. I remembered throwing it away before the move. Beside it was a folded piece of paper. The note said, "You can turn it off now." I reached for the light switch. Just before I touched it, I heard movement behind me. Not footsteps exactly. More like someone shifting their weight in the doorway. I turned. The hallway was dark, but in the living room window I could see a reflection. A person standing in the kitchen behind me. Same height, same posture, wearing the grey jumper I had worn constantly during my last winter in that apartment. The reflection raised one hand, very slowly, and pressed a finger to its lips. I turned the kitchen light off. The apartment went completely dark. When I opened my eyes, I was standing outside my current building, hand still on my own front door, as if I had just come home. The red-ringed key was gone from my pocket. I never went back to the old apartment. I looked up the building once, months later, and found recent photos from a rental listing. My old kitchen had been renovated. New cabinets, new tiles, new lights. But in one photo, taken from the hallway, there was a faint yellow glow under the closed kitchen door. And in the glossy reflection of the oven, I could see someone standing just out of frame, holding one finger to their lips. The taxi driver who knew my dream. I took the taxi because the last train was cancelled. It was raining hard, the station was closing, and everyone was standing under the shelter with that defeated look people get when they have already accepted that the journey home is going to cost too much. I opened a taxi app, but the prices were ridiculous, so when an older black cab pulled up by the curb, I walked over and asked if the driver could take me across town. He nodded without asking for the address. That should have bothered me, but I was tired and wet, and the inside of the cab was warm. I got in, told him the street name, and sank back against the seat. The driver was an older man with a flat cap and square shoulders. He had one of those quiet faces that look familiar even when they are not. The meter clicked on. The wipers moved steadily across the windshield. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You still having the dream about the bridge?" I looked up from my phone. "What?" "The bridge," he said. "The one with no other side." I had never told anyone about that dream. It was not a nightmare exactly. I had been having it since I was a teenager. In the dream, I walked across a long pedestrian bridge at night. It started normally with railings and lamps and the dark river below, but the far end never arrived. The bridge just continued into fog. Sometimes I would walk for hours. Sometimes I would hear people behind me, but when I turned around, the city side had disappeared too. I had not had the dream in years. I asked the driver if we knew each other. He shook his head. Not yet. I laughed a little because it was the only response I could find. That's a strange thing to say. He glanced at me in the mirror. You usually say that later. The rain thickened until the streetlights became blurred circles. I looked out the window, expecting the familiar route home, but the streets were wrong. Not impossible yet, just slightly off. A roundabout where there should not have been one. A row of shops I did not recognize. A church tower leaning at an angle I had never seen. I checked the map on my phone. The blue dot was not moving through the city. It was moving across the middle of the river. I told the driver to stop the car. He did not. There's no safe place here, he said. We were on a bridge by then. Not the bridge from my dream exactly, but close enough that my mouth went dry. Pedestrian railings on both sides. White lamps curving overhead. Rain moving sideways through the light. There were no other cars. I turned around to look through the rear window. The road behind us was swallowed by fog. I said, "Where are we?" The driver kept both hands on the wheel. Between. Between what? Where you fell asleep and where you woke up. I thought of telling him he was insane. I thought of opening the door. But the cab was moving too fast, and beyond the curb there was only dark water far below. Then I saw someone walking on the pavement beside the bridge. A young man in a soaked jacket, head down, hands in his pockets. For a few seconds I did not understand why he looked familiar. Then he passed under one of the lamps, and I saw my own face at 17, pale and exhausted, as if he had been walking for a very long time. The driver slowed the cab. "You can pick him up this time," he said. I could not speak. The younger version of me stopped walking and looked toward the cab. He did not seem surprised. His eyes moved from the driver to me, and he gave a tired little smile, the kind you give someone who is late. I whispered, "What happens if I do?" The driver sighed. "You remember the rest. And if I don't, you keep dreaming the bridge." The young man reached for the rear door handle. I locked it. I do not know why. Fear, maybe. Instinct. Some part of me that did not want to meet the version of myself who had been left walking there. The younger me stood in the rain, hand still near the door, and mouthed something through the glass. I could not hear it, but I understood anyway. Not fair. The cab drove on. I watched him vanish behind us into the fog. My chest hurt in a way I could not explain, like guilt for something that had not happened yet. The driver said nothing for the rest of the ride. When the fog cleared, we were on my street. The rain had stopped. The meter showed a normal fare, almost exactly what the app had estimated before the price surge. I paid in cash because I wanted the ride to end with as little record as possible. Before I got out, the driver handed me a small paper receipt. It showed my address, the fare, and the time. Under destination it said, "Bridge unresolved." I looked up to ask him what it meant, but the cab was already pulling away. That night, for the first time in years, I dreamed of the bridge. This time I was not walking on it. I was driving. The cab felt familiar under my hands. Rain moved across the windshield. In the back seat, someone was crying quietly. When I checked the mirror, I saw myself as I am now, older than the boy on the bridge, younger than the driver who had brought me home. On the pavement ahead, a figure walked alone through the fog. I woke up before I reached him. Since then, I do not take taxis from that station. I tell myself it is because the buses are cheaper, but that is not true. Last month, I saw the black cab again. It was parked across from my office in bright daylight, clean and dry even though rain was falling around it. The driver was not inside. On the back seat, visible through the window, was a folded umbrella and a sign that read, "Available when you are ready." The laundromat machine that was already full. There was a laundromat 3 streets from my old flat that stayed open all night. I used it mostly because I worked strange hours and never remembered to do laundry until I was down to the last acceptable shirt. The place had bright fluorescent lights, a coin machine that ate bills, and a row of orange plastic chairs along one wall. Nothing about it felt mysterious. If anything, it was aggressively ordinary. The machines had numbers taped above them. My favorite was machine 7, not because I believed in luck, but because it was the only washer that did not shake violently during the spin cycle. One winter night, close to midnight, I went there with a bag of clothes and found the place empty. The television mounted in the corner was playing a cooking show with no sound. Rain tapped against the front window. The floor smelled faintly of detergent and wet wool. Machine 7 was already running. That annoyed me more than it should have. There were plenty of other machines, but people get attached to stupid routines. I loaded machine 6 instead, paid, and sat down to wait. After about 20 minutes, machine 7 finished. The door clicked open. Nobody came to collect the clothes. I glanced at it a few times. The drum was full of dark fabric, pressed against the glass. Maybe someone had gone out for a cigarette or to buy something. That happened often enough. But another 20 minutes passed. Then 30. My own wash finished. I moved it to a dryer and kept looking at machine 7. The clothes inside did not look right. They were packed too tightly, as if someone had stuffed an entire wardrobe into one load. Eventually, curiosity won. I opened the door. Inside were my clothes. Not the ones I had just washed. Old clothes. Things I had not owned in years. A faded band shirt from university. A blue jumper my ex had kept after we broke up. A pair of jeans with a rip I remembered throwing away. Everything was wet and freezing cold. At the back of the drum, folded neatly on top of the pile, was a white towel embroidered with my initials. I had never owned a towel like that. I left the clothes where they were. I know that sounds impossible to believe. Anyone would want to take them, or at least check them properly. But standing there with the laundromat buzzing around me, I had the very strong feeling that removing those clothes would count as accepting something. I closed the machine door. The display lit up again. 29 minutes. It started running without coins. I grabbed my own laundry from the dryer while it was still damp and left. For a week, I avoided the place. I bought cheap socks instead of washing clothes. I wore shirts twice. Eventually, ordinary life pressed harder than fear, and I went back during the day. Machine 7 was out of order. There was a sign taped to it, written in marker. Do not use. Keeps returning items. I asked the woman working there what that meant. She was folding sheets behind the counter and barely looked up. Things get stuck in it, she said. What kind of things? She shrugged. People say clothes they lost. I laughed, but she did not. Sometimes not clothes, she added. I should have left. Instead, I asked if anyone had ever found a white towel with initials. She stopped folding. What initials? I told her. Her face changed in a way I did not like. She reached under the counter and pulled out a plastic bag. Inside was the towel. Same white fabric, same embroidered letters, A small paper tag was pinned to it. Found in machine 7. Owner collected next Thursday. I checked my phone. It was Thursday. Not next Thursday. This Thursday. I said, "That's not mine." The woman behind the counter looked past me toward the machines. "Then why does it keep coming back?" That night I dreamed I was inside the laundromat alone. All the machines were running, but there were no clothes in them. Just water churning behind glass. Machine 7 stood open at the end of the row, its drum dark and dry. In the dream I walked toward it because the television in the corner was saying my name in a cheerful cooking show voice. Inside the drum was a set of folded clothes. Black trousers, white shirt, dark jacket, the kind of thing someone might wear to a funeral. On top was a handwritten note. "Wear these tomorrow." I woke up before touching them. The next day, on my way to work, I saw police tape outside the laundromat. A man had collapsed there early in the morning, apparently from a heart problem. He survived, but only because another customer came in and called an ambulance. I do not know why that matters. I do not know what wearing the clothes would have changed. But for the rest of the day, I could not stop thinking about the word tomorrow. A few months later, the laundromat closed. The sign was taken down. Paper covered the windows. For a while, the place was empty. Then it became a small office for a driving school. Machine 7 should have been scrapped or moved or sold. But once, walking past after dark, I saw the old fluorescent lights on inside, even though the driving school was closed. Through a gap in the papered window, I saw the row of washers exactly as they had been, orange chairs against the wall, silent television in the corner. Machine 7 was running. And pressed against the glass, spinning slowly through the water, was the shirt I had been wearing that day. The photo booth beside platform 6. The photo booth was not supposed to be there. I had used that station for years and knew the layout better than I knew some parts of my own flat. Ticket machines by the main entrance. Coffee kiosk on the left. Toilets down the stairs. Platforms 1 through 4 near the big departures board. Platforms 5 and 6 across the footbridge. There had never been a photo booth beside platform 6. One evening, while waiting for a delayed train, I saw it tucked into the corner near the vending machines. Old style, with a blue curtain and a faded sign that said passport photos in 6 minutes. It looked like something from the 90s, too bulky and worn to have been installed recently. I was bored. That is the whole reason any of this happened. I had half an hour to wait, my phone was nearly dead, and the booth had a little glowing button that made it seem strangely inviting. I went in. The seat was too low. The curtain smelled like dust. There were instructions on the screen in green text. Look forward. Do not smile. Do not leave before the final flash. I put in the coins. The machine hummed. The first flash went off. Then the second. Then the third. Before the fourth, the screen changed. Turn around. I laughed nervously. There was no room to turn around. The booth was barely large enough for one person. The wall behind me was only a few inches from my shoulders. The fourth flash went off before I could move. The booth printed the photos. In the first 3 pictures, I looked exactly as expected. Tired, awkward, lit too harshly. In the fourth, there was someone standing behind me. A woman with wet hair, leaning close to my ear. Her mouth was open, as if she had been whispering something. I tore the fourth photo off the strip and threw it in a bin on the platform. I kept the first 3, although I do not know why. Maybe because they looked normal. Maybe because part of me wanted evidence that at least most of the machine had behaved properly. My train arrived. I got on. By the time I reached home, I had convinced myself it was a printing error. A smudge, a double exposure, an old image burned into the machine. Something technical. The next morning, the fourth photo was in my coat pocket. It was damp. The woman behind me was clearer than before. She looked about my age, maybe slightly older, with dark circles under her eyes and rainwater running down her face. Her lips were close to my ear. I turned the photo over. Something had been written on the back in blue pen. You heard me once. I had no memory of hearing anything. That day at work, I kept thinking about the station. During lunch, I searched online for news stories connected to Platform 6. Accidents, missing people, anything. I found nothing that seemed relevant. The photo booth did not appear in any recent pictures of the station. In one image from a few years earlier, the corner by the vending machines was empty. After work, I went back. The booth was still there. This time there was a small out-of-order sign taped to the curtain. I lifted the curtain anyway. Inside, sitting on the low stool, was a strip of photos already printed. All four showed the same woman. In the first, she was looking straight ahead. In the second, her eyes had moved slightly to the left. In the third, she was looking directly at the edge of the frame, as if seeing me outside the booth. In the fourth, she was gone, and the seat was empty. On the screen, green text blinked. Please sit down. I did not sit. I backed away and walked to the far end of the platform. My train was due in 5 minutes. I stood near other people, close enough that I could hear their conversations because being surrounded by ordinary noise made me feel safer. Then a woman's voice whispered beside my ear. You did hear me. I spun around. Nobody was close enough to have spoken. The train arrived with a rush of wind. I got on quickly, sat in the middle of a crowded carriage, and kept my eyes on the floor. At the next stop, a teenage boy got on and sat across from me. He pulled a folded strip of photos from his jacket pocket and looked at them with a confused expression. I saw only a glimpse, but it was enough. In the fourth photo, the wet-haired woman stood behind him too. I almost warned him. I almost said something. But then he looked up at me, and behind his reflection in the train window, I saw the woman standing in the aisle. She shook her head. Not angrily. Sadly. The boy got off 2 stops later. I never saw him again. A week after that, the photo booth vanished. Station staff denied it had ever been there. One employee told me people often confused that corner with another station. I still have the photo. The woman is not behind me anymore. The fourth picture now shows the inside of the booth empty, with the blue curtain slightly open. But every time I look at it, I notice the camera angle has changed. It is no longer facing the stool. It is facing outward toward Platform 6, as if something inside the booth is waiting to take a picture of whoever looks in next. The town clock that ran backward. The town I grew up in had an old clock tower in the market square. It was the sort of thing people used as a meeting point without really looking at it. Meet under the clock. Turn left at the clock. The clock says you are late. It had been there for more than 100 years, according to the little plaque near the base, and for most of my life it worked badly. Sometimes it lost 5 minutes in a week. Sometimes the bell struck 13 times at noon. Nobody cared enough to fix it properly. When I came back for my cousin's wedding, I had not visited the town in nearly a decade. The square looked smaller. The bakery was now a phone shop. The old post office had become a restaurant with tiny expensive chairs outside. The clock tower looked exactly the same, except the hands were moving backward. Not quickly. Not like something in a film. The minute hand moved in small steady clicks, 1 minute at a time, but in the wrong direction. I stood there with my suitcase, watching it go from 4:30 to 29 past, then 28. Nobody else seemed interested. I asked a man outside the phone shop if the clock had been broken long. He looked up and said, "It does that before something returns." Then he walked away before I could ask what he meant. I thought it was local humor. Small towns develop their own little jokes, and people enjoy confusing anyone who has been gone too long. I checked into the hotel near the square and forgot about it until that night when I woke to bells ringing. 4 bells. Then 3. Then 2. Then 1. Then silence. The next morning the square was misty and quiet. I went out early to buy coffee before meeting my family. The clock showed 7:10, then 9 past, then 8. In the cafe, my cousin looked tired and distracted. She said the venue had lost the reservation, which was impossible because she had confirmed it twice. My aunt said the florist claimed nobody had ordered the flowers. The best man's suit had disappeared from his hotel room. Everyone laughed about wedding chaos, but the laughter felt thin. At noon, the clock struck backward again. 12 bells, then 11, then 10, the sound growing softer each time until it seemed to come from very far away. After that, people began forgetting things. Not losing them. Forgetting them. My uncle forgot he had a daughter getting married. For a few terrifying minutes, he sat in the hotel lobby asking why everyone was dressed up. Then he blinked and remembered, embarrassed and angry. The bride forgot the groom's middle name. The groom forgot the song they had chosen for their first dance. I walked back to the square because I did not know what else to do. The clock now showed a time I recognized. 3:17. When I was a child, something had happened in that square at 3:17. I did not remember what. I only remembered my mother pulling me away from the clock tower, gripping my wrist too hard, and telling me not to look back. The man from the phone shop was there again, standing under the clock with his hands in his coat pockets. I asked him what was returning. He looked at me with pity. "The part you left here." At 3:17, the square emptied. It happened gradually, and then all at once. People stepped into shops, turned down side streets, went inside cafes. By the time the clock hand clicked into place, I was alone under the tower with the man from the phone shop. A child stood in the middle of the square. He was about 9 years old, wearing a red jumper and carrying a paper bag from the old bakery that no longer existed. He looked familiar in the way old photographs look familiar before you remember they are of you. The child was me. He stared at the clock tower, eyes wide, as if something above the face was moving. I looked up. There was a narrow door in the tower high above the clock, where no door had ever been. It stood open into darkness. Someone inside was leaning out. I could not see their face. The man beside me said, "Last time you ran." The child dropped the paper bag. Inside were 2 pastries, flattened slightly from being carried too tightly. I remembered them suddenly. My mother had sent me to buy them. I had come back crying. For years, whenever anyone mentioned that afternoon, she said I had been frightened by a pigeon or a drunk man or some ordinary thing she kept changing. The figure in the tower raised one long arm and pointed at the child. The clock began moving forward again. The square filled with sound. Car engines. Voices. Cups clinking. The child vanished. When I looked down, the paper bag was at my feet. Inside were 2 pastries, still warm. The wedding went ahead. Everyone remembered what they needed to remember. The clock kept normal time for the rest of the weekend. Before leaving town, I asked my mother what really happened that day when I was young. She went pale and said, "You told me someone in the clock wanted you back." Then she asked how I knew about that, because she had spent years trying not to remember it. I have not returned to the town since. My cousin says the clock is broken again, but now it runs fast instead of slow. She sent me a video last week. For 1 second between the bell strikes, there is a dark open doorway above the clock face, and a hand, very thin and pale, waving slowly from inside. The apartment above mine. For 3 years I lived on the top floor of my building. I knew this because I climbed the stairs every day. There were 6 floors, no lift, and my apartment was at the end of the hall under the roof. Above me was nothing but old insulation, pipes, and whatever noises old buildings make at night when they settle. That is why the footsteps bothered me. They started in autumn. At first, I thought they were coming from next door, or maybe from the pipes. Old buildings carry sound strangely. But after a few nights, there was no mistaking it. Someone was walking directly above my bedroom. Slow steps. Across the ceiling. Pause. Back again. I called the landlord, and he laughed gently. "You are the top floor," he said. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." He sent someone to check the roof. Nothing. No sign of animals, no access point left open, no loose boards. The maintenance man stood in my bedroom listening for a while, then shrugged and said old beams could sound like that when temperatures changed. That night the footsteps returned. This time they stopped directly above my bed. Then someone knocked on the ceiling from the other side. 3 polite knocks. I lay there without breathing. A few seconds later, a muffled voice said, "Can you keep it down?" After that, I started sleeping in the living room. The footsteps followed. Not every night. That almost made it worse. If it had happened constantly, I might have adapted or broken down. Instead, it came just often enough to keep me listening. A chair scraping above the kitchen. A cupboard closing above the hallway. Once, music playing faintly through the ceiling, an old song I recognized but could not name. I asked my neighbors. Nobody else heard it. One evening, I came home and found an envelope taped to my door. Inside was a noise complaint. It looked official with the building address and a typed form. Apartment number 7. My apartment was 6. The complaint said, "Resident below repeatedly disturbs quiet hours by pacing, speaking, and moving furniture after midnight." At the bottom, under complainant, someone had written, "Upstairs." There was no apartment 7. I called the landlord again. This time he sounded irritated. He said there had never been a 7th floor, but then he paused and asked me to send a photo of the form. An hour later he called back. "Where did you get this?" I told him. He said very carefully, "That form is from before the renovation." "What renovation?" He was quiet for too long. "The building used to have another floor," he said. "Decades ago. There was a fire." I looked up at the ceiling. Someone above me dragged a heavy piece of furniture across the floor. I searched the building online and found old newspaper scans. There had been a fire in the 70s. Top floor had been damaged badly enough that it was removed, and the roofline was rebuilt lower. Apartment 7 had existed. There were 2 grainy photos of the building from before, taller by 1 floor. One article mentioned that the resident of apartment 7 had complained repeatedly about noise from the apartment below in the weeks before the fire. That night, I did not leave the apartment. I sat at my kitchen table with every light on and waited. At midnight, the footsteps began. They moved from one side of the ceiling to the other, faster than usual. Then the music started, muffled and warped, followed by voices. More than one person above me. A party, maybe. Or an argument. Then the smell of smoke filled the room. I grabbed my coat and ran to the door. The hallway was clear, but the ceiling above the stairwell was stained dark, as if smoke were pressing down through it from somewhere that was not there. On the landing above the 6th floor, where there should only have been a locked roof door, there was a staircase. It went up into orange light. I heard someone coughing. Then a woman shouted, "He's still downstairs." I do not know why I climbed. Maybe because I understood that downstairs meant me. Maybe because, for a second, the terror of hearing someone trapped was stronger than the terror of the staircase itself. At the top was a hallway I had never seen. Apartment 7 stood open, full of smoke. Old wallpaper curled on the walls. A radio played somewhere inside. A woman stood in the doorway, covering her mouth with one hand. She looked at me and said, "You finally heard us." Then the fire alarm in my real building went off. I was back on the 6th floor landing, staring at the locked roof door. My neighbors were coming out of their apartments in pajamas. There was no smoke. The alarm had malfunctioned. I moved out 2 months later. A friend lives near that building now. She sent me a photo recently because scaffolding is up around it for repairs. In the picture, above the top floor, there is a row of windows that should not exist. One of them is lit. And in the lit window, someone is standing with both hands pressed against the glass, looking down. The shortcut through the closed mall. The shopping mall near my office had been half dead for years before it finally closed. Even when it was open, most of the shops had metal shutters pulled down and paper signs promising renovations that never happened. The food court smelled like old oil. The fountain had no water in it. The escalators only worked when they felt like it. Still, it was useful as a shortcut. If I walked through the mall, I could get from the bus stop to my office in 7 minutes instead of 12. In winter, that mattered. 5 minutes less in the rain feels like a luxury. When the mall closed for redevelopment, they blocked most entrances with boards and chain-link fencing. But for a few weeks, one side door near the loading bay stayed unlocked. People from nearby offices kept using it. Nobody stopped us. One evening in November, I worked late and reached the side door after dark. The parking area was empty. A security light buzzed overhead. The door opened when I pushed it, and I stepped into the mall. The lights were on. Not the harsh security lights I expected. The normal shop lights. Bright window displays, glowing signs, reflections on polished floors. Music played from somewhere overhead, cheerful and thin. For a moment I thought the mall had reopened without me knowing. Then I saw the shops. They were all wrong. A record store where there had never been one. A toy shop with wooden animals in the window. A travel agency advertising flights to cities whose names were almost familiar but not quite. Every sign looked old-fashioned, but not from the same decade. The whole place felt assembled from memories of malls rather than a real one. At the center, the dry fountain was running. A child sat on the edge, trailing one hand through the water. He looked up at me and said, "You're early." I should have turned around. Instead, I asked what he meant, because that is what people do when fear has not fully caught up to them. The child shrugged. "Most people come after they forget the way." I looked back toward the side door. It was gone. In its place was a shop window displaying mannequins dressed in office clothes. One of them wore my coat. I started walking quickly toward where the main exit should have been. The mall seemed longer than usual. Corridors stretched in directions that did not exist. Every time I passed a directory map, the little red "You Are Here" dot had moved farther from the exits. There were other people inside. An old man eating soup alone in the food court. A teenage girl sitting outside the record store crying silently. A woman pushing an empty pram past a row of dark shop fronts. None of them looked at me. I found the main entrance eventually, but the glass doors opened onto another part of the mall. Same fountain. Same child. Same impossible shops. The child waved. "You still have your route," he said. "Use it." I thought of my shortcut. Side door, service corridor, old department store, fountain, main exit. I had walked it hundreds of times without paying attention. I closed my eyes and tried to remember it not as it looked, but as it felt. Turn right at the cold patch near the loading door. Straight until the floor changed texture. Left where the bakery smell used to be. Past the broken escalator. Toward the sound of traffic. When I opened my eyes, the mall was dimmer. The fountain was dry again. But something behind me whispered, "Wrong way." I did not look back. I walked the route from memory. The shops flickered around me. Record store, shuttered pharmacy, travel agency, empty unit. The mall seemed unable to decide what it was. At the old department store, I saw a row of people standing behind the glass doors. They were all facing inward toward me. Some were dressed in modern clothes. Others looked like they belonged to different years. A woman in a bright 80s coat. A man in a suit with wide lapels. A little boy holding a balloon that had gone soft and wrinkled. The child from the fountain stood among them. He pressed his palm against the glass and said, though I could barely hear him, "Next time, you'll know more of the way." The main doors appeared ahead. I ran. Outside, the street was wet and ordinary. Traffic hissed past. My office building stood across the road, dark except for the lobby. I checked my phone. Only 6 minutes had passed. The next day, the side door was boarded shut. The mall was demolished the following spring. A new development is going up there now, glass apartments and a gym and cafes with plants hanging in the windows. They have already changed the shape of the streets around it. My old shortcut no longer exists. But sometimes, when I walk past the construction site after work, I hear mall music under the noise of traffic. And once, reflected in the dark glass of the new apartment building, I saw a bright indoor fountain running behind me. On its edge sat a child, watching me. He raised one hand and pointed toward a doorway that was not there. The birthday card from next year. The card arrived 2 days before my birthday. It was in a plain white envelope with my name and address handwritten in blue ink. No return address. The stamp was real, the postmark local. Nothing about it seemed unusual until I opened it. The card itself was one of those generic supermarket birthday cards with balloons on the front. Inside, someone had written, "I hope this year is easier than the last one." Under that was a longer message. "I know you probably do not understand yet. That is all right. Keep the card. Do not go to the restaurant on Friday. When you hear glass break, stay seated." It was signed with my sister's name. The problem was that my sister was sitting across from me at my kitchen table when I opened it. She had come over early with a present because she was leaving town for work. I showed her the card, expecting her to laugh or admit to some strange joke. Instead, she went quiet. "That's my handwriting," she said. I asked if she had sent it. No. We compared it to a note she had written on the gift tag. Same slant. Same little loop on the Y. Same way she crossed her T's too far to the right. The restaurant on Friday was real. My friends had booked it for my birthday. I had not told many people, but my sister knew. She told me not to go. I said that would make me look insane. She said, "Maybe look insane." I kept the card on my desk and tried not to think about it. By Friday evening, I had convinced myself someone was playing a prank. Maybe my sister had written it half asleep and forgotten. Maybe one of my friends had copied her handwriting. Maybe I wanted the mystery more than I wanted the truth. I went to the restaurant. For most of the evening, nothing happened. We sat near the back, under a wall of framed mirrors. The food was good. The conversation was normal. Someone brought a cake with one candle because they said more would be a fire hazard. I started to feel foolish for being tense. Then I heard glass break. A waiter near the bar had dropped a tray. The sound was sharp and bright, and before I could think, I remembered the card. "Stay seated." Everyone else turned to look. I stayed still. At that exact moment, one of the framed mirrors above our table came loose from the wall. It fell forward and struck the back of the empty chair beside me. The chair I would have been leaning over if I had turned with everyone else. The mirror shattered across the seat. The restaurant went silent. My friends kept asking if I was okay. I said yes. I did not mention the card. When I got home, the birthday card was open on my desk, although I had left it closed. There was a new line written under the original message. "Good. Now answer the phone next Tuesday." I called my sister immediately. She answered, sounding sleepy and annoyed. I asked if she had been to my apartment. She said no. Then she said, "What phone?" I did not know. The card did not say. Next Tuesday, I stayed home from work. I kept every phone near me, mobile on the table. Old landline I had not used in months plugged back into the wall. Laptop open in case it meant a video call. I felt ridiculous and frightened at the same time. At 4:12 in the afternoon, the landline rang. Only my parents had that number, and even they never used it. I answered. For a few seconds, there was only static. Then my sister's voice said, "I'm sorry I sent the first one late." She sounded older, tired. I said her name. She made a small sound like she was trying not to cry. "Listen carefully," she said. "You need to start writing them down when they arrive, not just keeping them. Writing them down changes who remembers." "What are you talking about?" "The cards," she said. "There are more than one." The line crackled. I heard another voice in the background, mine, saying, "Tell him not to read the black envelope." Then the call went dead. I searched my apartment and found nothing new. No black envelope. No extra cards. A year passed. 2 days before my next birthday, another card arrived. Same supermarket balloons. Same blue handwriting. Same signature. This one said, "The black envelope comes after the party. Do not open it alone." I did not have a party that year. I cancelled it. The black envelope came anyway. It was waiting on my pillow when I got home from work, sealed with no stamp and no name. I have not opened it. It is still in a drawer under the birthday cards, which now arrive every year whether I celebrate or not. Some contain warnings. Some contain apologies. One simply said, "I wish we had believed you sooner." The newest card arrived this morning. It was not signed by my sister. It was signed by me. The search result with my address. I found it while searching for a plumber. My kitchen sink had started leaking under the cabinet, and after trying to fix it myself with a towel and misplaced confidence, I gave up and searched online for someone nearby. Normal search. Normal results. Ads, maps, reviews, phone numbers. Then, on the second page, I saw my address. Not as part of a business listing. It was the title of a web page. Flat 2B, 17 Alder Row. That was my address. The snippet underneath said, "Last updated after the lights went out." I stared at it for a long time without clicking. There are normal explanations for addresses appearing online. Rental listings, old directories, planning applications, leaked data. I knew that. But something about the wording made my skin tighten. I clicked. The page loaded slowly. It was almost blank. White background, black text, no logo. At the top was my address. Under it was a list of dates. Most were ordinary dates from the past few years. Move in. First leak under sink. Forgot keys. Argument in hallway. There were future dates too. Lights go out. Do not answer knocking. Bedroom window opens from outside. I closed the laptop. The sink kept dripping inside the cabinet. When I opened the page again, it had changed. The future dates were gone, except for one line. Lights go out. The date was that same night. I called a friend and asked if I could come over. I made up something about the leak and not wanting to deal with it. She said yes, of course, but while I was packing a bag, my power went out. Everything stopped at once. Fridge hum, hallway light, router, the little electric click of the boiler. The apartment went very still. My phone still had signal. I turned on the flashlight and went to the front door. Someone knocked before I reached it. 3 slow knocks. I stood there with my hand on the bag strap, remembering the web page. Do not answer knocking. The knock came again. Then a voice said my name. It sounded like my friend, the one I had just called. She said, "I came to get you." I looked through the peephole. The hallway was dark, but I could see her standing outside in a raincoat, even though it had not been raining. Her face was lowered so I could not see her eyes. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from the same friend. Leaving now. Be there in 20. The person outside knocked again. This time, not on the door. On the peephole. From the inside. I backed away and went to the bedroom because it was the only room with a window onto the street. Outside, the whole block had power except my building. Warm squares of light shone from other apartments. Cars passed. Normal life continued, separated from me by glass. Then my bedroom window opened. Not by much. Just a few centimeters. The latch lifted by itself and cold air pushed in. I slammed it shut and locked it. My phone buzzed again. A browser notification from the page. New update available. I do not remember giving the site permission to send notifications. I opened it because fear makes people do stupid things. The page now showed a new line under my address. You checked the window too late. Below that was another line, appearing letter by letter. He still thinks this is a warning. The knocking at the front door stopped. A sound came from the kitchen cabinet where the sink had been leaking. A wet scraping sound, like fingers dragging through spilled water. I climbed out the bedroom window onto the fire escape, which I had never used before. I waited there shaking until my real friend arrived and shouted up at me from the pavement. When we went back inside together, the power was on. The sink had stopped leaking. The kitchen floor was dry. The web page no longer exists. I tried to find it the next day and got an error. Search engine showed nothing. No cache. No history entry except the original plumber search. But sometimes, when I search for ordinary things now, I see my address for a fraction of a second between results. Always with a new snippet. Last week it said, he is learning to leave earlier. This morning it said, not early enough. I have not used that search engine since.